Hello and welcome to Cookie Pocket. This is episode 89. I am joined today by my usual co-host, Mitchell and Christian, and also this is our second guested episode of the season. So we have a guest today, a mysterious man. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Connor Drake, and I'm guesting on Cookie Pocket.
Yes. Hey, hi, guessing on Cookie Pocket.
Would you care to tell us a little bit about yourself, or are you okay with that?
Oh, sure. I am a filmmaker, mostly focusing on camera and lighting, but I write stuff sometimes, and I direct stuff, and look me up, please God, if you're giving people work in the Baltimore area.
Alrighty. Yeah, Connor and I have worked together quite a few times. Most recently, if you donated to The Search for Alexander, Connor was the cinematographer on the tavern section of that film. The Search for Alexander, coming to a YouTube channel near you maybe next year. Hopefully next year, we'll see. Okay, now enough of the rigmarole. It's time to move on to our discussion. Because today we are talking about Black Sabbath from 1963. This is a film directed by Mario Bava, who is sort of known unofficially as the father of Italian horror. And this is an anthology film. This is an anthology film hosted by Boris Karloff, a British horror legend, in which there are three different sort of campfire horror stories executed in slightly different ways each time. But it's sort of your typical 60s anthology horror film. I've brought Italian horror to the table a couple times on the podcast, and it's been met with scathing derision on both occasions. So this time round, I was trying to go for something maybe a little quainter, but it seems that my attempts were unsuccessful. So I think that's a good segue. What did you guys think of Black Sabbath in general? Just your overall thoughts on the film.
Well, can I give you a two-word recap really quick?
Sure, yeah.
Insatiably horny.
Yes! See, this guy gets it. All right.
Well, but that's not a good thing. If I leave a horror film and my thoughts are, you're too horny, and not, oh, that was spooky, you've messed up somewhere along the way.
Okay. All right. I'm intrigued. Mitchell, Christian, would you agree with this insatiably horny subtitle?
Yeah. Yeah. Too insatiable. Like, you're going to find something else to do instead of this, honestly. Yeah, I think, yeah. You know what? Christian can go.
Okay, sure. I guess
I'm intrigued.
I'll just dive into the deep end here, since we're all just kind of treading water. Well, I will say the derision that Zach is referencing in our prior explorations of Italian horror has mostly been delivered by me. I think Mitchell has been much more diplomatic and measured in his assessment of these things than I have. And I will say that of the three Italian horrors I've been subjected to, yes, that was intentional, Zach. This one was the least hateful to me. So there you go. I landed on a 2 out of 5 for this because it's not bad enough to be a 1. I'm not going to be a total jerk to you, Zach. Come on. But I even admittedly, like, parts of the second segment, I was like a willing and interested audience member for like sometimes, which was nice. The first segment with the whole phone call thing, I think maybe like 10 minutes into it, I just got this idea of this like sketch comedy spoof of these horror movies where there are these creepy guys calling women over the phone, like we saw in Black Christmas and has been done, I'm sure, a million other times. I just couldn't shake the idea of why don't they just stop answering the phone and like lock the door? Like, what if they just went to bed and it was all okay? And I was very amused by this what was it called? The thoughts that are obtrusive.
Hypothetical?
Intrusive, I don't know.
Oh.
Hypothetical, sure. That just distracted me. But no, on a critical level, I thought the performances in Section 1 left a lot to be desired. And, I hate dubbing, and I find it very distracting. But Boris Karloff is just obviously the best performer of the bunch, and that does a lot for the second segment. It's not my thing, but if Italian horror is your thing, I'm sure that this is totally fine and maybe sometimes fun, but it's really just so not for me, and I find it kind of boring a lot of the time. So 2 out of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, that's I'm pretty much right there with you, except for Boris Karloff being good.
ooh.
That was just like I did not vibe with any of the performances until the third piece. The woman that played the nurse sold it for me.
Or nothing.
Where I was just like, okay, it's the only one that I think worked narratively. The only one where I think the cinematography worked, and with like actual purposeful sound design and not just like whatever they decided to do. The only thing that killed it for me was the dead woman, no generous air quotes, woman with the just like grotesque plastic puppet that they're like, yeah, this is a corpse.
Oh, see, okay, Drop of Water is my favorite. Largely due to the reasons that you mentioned, Connor. I think that one holds together the best as like a cohesive whole, and I think there's a lot of great visual ideas in that one. I really love the nurse in the Drop of Water. There's like a neon sign outside her apartment that like dims and brightens. I think that's a great visual motif for later.
I will admit, I didn't like that.
Oh, no.
That I was just like, because I didn't know what it was supposed to be. I was like, is this like the moonlight with trees blowing in front of it?
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing here? But it was also the least horny. Of the 3 films, it's the only one where nobody's horny. And it was the best. And I think that's why.
Maybe it's a neon sign for the club next door.
Yeah, I don't think we see what the neon sign is for, but it's one of those things where it's like, realistically, why would you ever like leave your curtains wide open at the very least when you have that sign outside your window? But I think it makes for a very interesting effect, certainly when the corpse starts to move around and it's sort of bathed in darkness and then comes out, and bathed in darkness and comes out. And I even like the corpse. I don't think it's meant to necessarily be realistic. It's just sort of this grotesque idea of like, what does a ghoul look like? And so I kind of like that representation of that idea, at least. So we've kind of discussed favorites and least favorites, but I'm gonna go. We discussed an anthology earlier in the season when we talked about Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. So I want to address a similar question that we talked about there. Kind of more specifically, did you have like a favorite, or if you've already talked about a favorite, a least favorite of these sketches? Which did you think worked the best and the worst, respectively, I guess?
I personally liked the Vertilac the best, but I think the Drop of Water, or A Drop of Water, was the best made one, and I felt like it was the most cohesive, and it felt like it wasn't restrained to like a linear storyline, I guess. I'm kind of like leaning towards saying that because I guess I wasn't eagerly anticipating what the next like narrative beat was going to be for the telephone one, because you kind of just, it really feels like nothing's happening until something happens, I guess. And then for A Drop of Water, it kind of feels like there's a build-up and there's like a sense of suspense. And then the Vertilac felt, maybe it's like a bias because it's in like multiple locations and it's more expansive physically. But I do think that the Vertilac was like the most delving into whatever story it was replicating, I guess. And I felt like the picking off one by one kind of slasher, I guess, sort of thing kind of worked out for me. And I felt like that was what was carrying the suspense the whole time. And also I felt like it had the most varied acting too. And I felt like the characters had the most change of emotions in that one. But on the other hand, I do think A Drop of Water probably is like the best, is the most well-made one. And like the telephone ones are so unremarkable. And it's the neat idea, but it doesn't, I don't know. I guess the punchline really doesn't hit at all for me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I'm on similar footing, though. I would just say that the Vertalock is in my opinion the best, in addition to being my favorite. And in retrospect, I feel kind of silly admitting this, but just the way the plot is structured, I felt like I had unanswered questions and was marginally curious in learning those answers. Like the whole timing of it, his saying that if he returns more than 5 days later, don't let him in or kill him or whatever it was, and he returns like minutes too late. Like, to me, that is very interesting and more complicated than Ooga Booga on the phone. And also in retrospect, I feel silly admitting this. It's probably fairly predictable, but I was genuinely like, oh, maybe I wonder who's going to get bitten. I wonder what will happen to all of these people. I wonder who will be victimized and who won't, and if somebody will prevail over this guy. I feel like it plays out in probably the most predictable manner, but I don't know. I feel like there was a wide enough range of possibilities for suspense to at least work itself over a willing audience member. And but I don't know if the ending completely works, because like they're all just kind of like bitten, and then it's just kind of another intrusive thought to me was just like, oh, now they can all just be a big happy Vertalock family together. It doesn't matter anymore if they're all blood-sucking crazies. and I will echo what Mitchell said about how the performances feel more various, and that like I think the reason that the telephone one doesn't work for me is because I get nothing from any of the performers really. And it's just so, I feel like they're all very bare bones, and not that we need any sort of like dense background story for these characters, but they're these two women, we get this like vague sense that they were friends and that they were fighting or whatever, but it's like I think I've said this before when we were talking about one of the other Italian horror films. It's like really, really well choreographed action with characters that you just don't care about at all. Even if the situation is interesting, if derivative, I just don't care if I don't like or at least have opinions about the characters in it.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say the Vertalack was probably my least favorite.
Wow. Okay.
Which I'm getting the sense is an unpopular opinion, but I think the performances didn't work for me, and the pacing just stopped me from feeling any sense of suspense, where I was like, well, he's going to come back and he's going to be the vampire thing, and then he's going to kill somebody, and then they're going to, and it's just like da-da-da-da-da. No, of course the couple that apparently fell madly in love in like the course of 4 hours isn't going to make it out alive. But I think it could have worked very well to me in the format of a feature film, where you have more time to get to know the characters, you have more time to build suspense and that expansive world. Whereas I don't think the phone call or the drop of water would have worked as a larger narrative, because they're so kind of condensed. And like Drop of Water, I think that really benefits it. The phone call, I really had no idea what was going on with it, and the only reason it's not my least favorite is that I've just decided, my own headcanon is that it's a lesbian love story. And
well, it is.
And that's like the whole thing for me, that like she's calling her ex-girlfriend, pretending to be her ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend, being like a creepy weirdo, so that, oh, she's going to come running back to me, and then her plot gets torn apart because the dude is actually there. Yeah. And, ends up killing her.
Yeah.
And that adds depth to it, but none of that is actually in the script, at least not literally. So I've just placed my own kind of queer filter over it to make it palatable for me as an audience member.
That is more interesting.
Well, apparently, I have not read a copy of the script myself, but apparently that stuff is actually in the film. And Frank, the film, not in the original script, but since it's 1963, they can't necessarily put that in the text of the film, so they've got to try and imply it, which I think kind of comes off, but also kind of not. It's a little loose. It depends what filter you apply to it. Apparently, additionally in the script, which they certainly couldn't say in the text was Frank is not only Rosie's ex-boyfriend, he's also her pimp, which adds another layer to it as well. I kind of agree with you, Connor, that I think the Vertalock is my least favorite, and I like Boris Karloff. I think we all watched the Italian version of this film, which dubbing Boris Karloff in Italian, I think, kind of robs him of one of his greatest strengths as an actor, which is his voice, because he does have a very good kind of spooky voice, which in this he's just dubbed with some high-pitched Italian man, which I don't think has nearly the impression that he would if he'd been able to speak in his own language, in his own voice. Drop of Water is my favorite, and I really, the impression seems to have been that the telephone was kind of middling, but I like the telephone quite a bit. It is kind of basic, I think, but I think in an anthology, really, the stories should be sort of basic, especially an anthology horror film, because I mentioned in the intro, but to me, these just feel like campfire ghost stories, and the way that most ghost stories start, you just start with the characters. A lot of the time, you don't necessarily get an introduction of like, oh, and Rosie's mother died when she was 13, but she continued to try to find some way to... You're there with Rosie, and kind of the atmosphere is what gets you into the scares. I also think that in terms of production and direction and cinematography, I think the telephone and the Drop of Water are much more interesting than the Vertalock. The Vertalock, a lot of it is just these flat two shots inside the cabin or inside like the crypt. And I think, like, for instance, the shot in the telephone where they do the snap zoom to the blinds as Frank is peering in, I think that shot is more creative and spookier than anything in the Vertalock. Connor, you were shaking your head.
Zach, I'm tired of your snapshots, Zach. I don't care. Okay, you could do that with anything and say that it's creepy. Okay,
right? Like, okay, the telephone, in my opinion, was like the sloppiest cinematographically, however you pronounce it, and lighting-wise. I was just like, this is a mess. Like, how many times is she gonna turn off and on all of the lights in her house?
She only does it twice.
Just make a decision and go with it. And then the fact that, like, they're trying to motivate their lighting, but none of the lighting is actually coming from the direction of any of the sources in the house. And like, oh, we did one smash zoom, like that makes us cool. Whereas I think in the Vertalock, you had all of those lovely, like, proscenium wides that are lit like it's a stage play. And that's what I really enjoyed, is you got creative with, like, the blue moonlight and then the firelight coming up, and to me that made lots of fun, like, interplay with shadows and kind of color contrast that I really enjoyed. Like, I think the visuals were the saving grace of the Vertalock for me. Still my least favorite of the three, but visually I think it stood on its own 2 feet, whereas Telephone was just like trash tier.
Oh wow, okay. I will say I like the lighting in the Vertalock for the most part. When I was referring to the cinematography in the Telephone, I think I'm talking more about, like, the camera movements and whatnot. I do think I like the purples and blues and the firelight in the Vertalock. There's a couple shots outside when he's moving around from, like, the house to the stables where it's incredibly obvious that the moon is just, like, a big white 1K or higher. You would know the wattage more than I would. Just numbers positioned up at the top, and that distracts me. I wish I could have found a better print of this movie for us all to watch, because I have seen shots, like stills, from prints of the Italian color grade, which look really, really beautiful and really pop, especially in the Vertalock, more than the print that we had here, that I think we all watched, which was on either Plex or Canopy. I still think it looks good. I think it looks all right, but I look at the rich colors and shots I've seen, and I think, I would have rather seen that. Now, something that we've also all touched upon, at least a little bit, or maybe it's just me and Christian now that I think about it, but we talked about the dubbing and the voices. So as I've ranted on about to everybody here in different situations, I think. The standard in Italian cinema for a long time was that they didn't record any sound on set and then they dubbed everything in post. I'm introducing this as well for the audience, not just for us Christians. Which means that you can watch any version of an Italian film from this time period and it's still going to be dubbed because they weren't recording anything, regardless of what accent or what language the actor was speaking in. So I just kind of wanted to, but actually, let me continue with my information here. This is the first Italian film we've watched on this show that we've watched it in Italian instead of dubbed into English. So I was curious as to Mitchell and Christian, how you felt that affected your viewing compared to the other English dubbed Italian films you've watched. And for Connor, how do you think the dubbing affected your viewing in general? Did you find it distracting, or were you able to kind of coast with it? Anyone can go first.
Okay, I'll jump in.
Okay.
I wish I could say that it was better this time around, but I think it just gave me another layer of like navigation, because I mean, when it's dubbed in English, it's like fine, okay, you hear it, but when it's dubbed in Italian and then you also have to read the subtitles, and I don't know if you guys had this issue on Plex, but I felt like by the time we got to the third segment, the subtitles were running like a little bit late. Like a character would finish her sentence, and then like another like third of a second would go by, and then the sentence would show up in the subtitle. And this was mostly only an issue in the third segment, and not consistently terrible, but was enough to be annoying. And I'll say what I've said in previous recordings of Italian horror, which is that I accept that this is the standard for Italian cinema, but Italian cinema must also accept where I'm coming from and what my standards are and what I'm used to in most of the cinema I consume, and it is not dubbing. And to be very clear, my issue is not, I'm not like one of these people that won't watch a foreign film because I don't want to read subtitles or think about that stuff. I'm absolutely not one of those people. I think Akira Kurosawa is my most watched director, but I think it was worse. The dubbing, I was more used to it because at this point I've consumed it more. But if I'm trying to compare more dispassionately, I think it was worse that it was dubbed, so the sound is not synced with the mouth movements and the physicality of the actors, and then it's not in the language you can comprehend, and then you also have to read the subtitle. So it was like 3 tiers of imperfect understanding as opposed to 1 or 2. So I was more used to accepting how that makes it more stilted to me, or more is lost in translation, but no, it did still bother me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm on the exact same page. I think it really detracts from the fact that you're trying to immerse yourself in this environment, especially with how beautiful the visuals were, and like really basically how flawless all of the prop setup and everything was. It seemed like everything was very intricately put together on the sets, and I think it kind of just detracts from the entire film and just being invested in the characters at all, or what distress they're going through when you're trying to understand what the hell they're saying.
I disagree. I'm going to sound like an idiot here, because this is apparently already understood by everybody else. I did not realize it was dubbed in post.
Hey!
Wow.
I think for me, I was like watching it, and I've noticed it with older films before, where you're like, yeah, the sync isn't perfect, and then because I was already reading subtitles, I think for me it's like watching anime, where I'm just like, I'm gonna look at the pretty picture, and then I'm gonna read the subtitles, and I'm not gonna think too much about like the actors and what they're doing. It's just like, yeah, I see the face, I see the pretty thing, I get the story from the little words on the bottom, and I just kind of vibe. And I also, and this is going to make me sound stupid, I was like, I didn't know Boris Karloff spoke Italian. This is really impressive.
Okay. Well, okay. I wasn't that fooled by the film. But I do think, and also I watch a lot of gialli. I watch a lot of Italian films. I actually enjoy this genre, and I'm not forced to watch it every summer by my friend. So for me, I'm kind of blind to it at this point. Just it's dubbed, and I'm okay with it. I will say, though, a lot of the available copies of Jolly that I watch are in English. And I do think that it's easier, or it's less distracting, at least I'll say, to see them in Italian with subtitles than it is in the English. Because a lot of the time, these films are dubbed by, in English at least, by a totally different team to the people who actually put the film together. So the default English line delivery in a lot of these Italian horror films is like shrieking at the top of your lungs, or I don't know, like a very dead level that's equivalent or comparable to like a flight attendant announcing the safety rules on a plane. I find that when these are dubbed into English, there's a much bigger emotional disconnect for me between the line delivery and the performance a lot of the time. And this also might be because I know English and I don't understand Italian, but at least for me, I didn't find that with this film, where it did feel to me that, okay, that line delivery clearly doesn't match the lips necessarily, but it seems to match the intention and the emotion. And ultimately, I think that's kind of what's important, at least for me, at the end of the day. Now, something I don't think any of us have brought up, which I do really want to talk about, is that this film, there's the three segments. There's an introduction by Boris Karloff, where he's standing in a purple void, and then there's the three segments, and then there's kind of a little closer where Boris Karloff is in his Verdelock costume, and he says, "Ooh, the vampires might get you," to the viewer. And then we have kind of this like winking, self-aware ending as the camera pulls out, and we see the camera crew, and we see that he's riding a fake horse, and we see crew members running around with tree branches. That kind of establishes the artifice of the film, which was a term that came up a lot on The Search for Alexander, at least the segment that Connor and I shot together. So I just wanted to ask, what did you think of that ending? And do you think it works with the tone of the rest of the film, or did that kind of tank the emotion or the potential eeriness of the ending of The Drop of Water for you?
I think if you're looking at it from the perspective of campfire stories, like through that lens, I think it works where you're like at the end of a campfire story, you go, and that's it, and then everybody like looks around and you're like, ooh, yeah, that was spooky. But I did not like it. And it put this image in my head where I was like, Boris Karloff just like reminded me of Bill Hader for some reason in that moment, like at the end of like an SNL skit, going like, hee hee hee, wasn't this so much fun? And then, like the camera pulls back and the audience applauds, and you're like, okay, and now we're done. Yeah.
Okay, it is weirdly similar actually. Now that you mention it, every now and then on an SNL sketch, they don't do it all the time, but they do sometimes cut to that wider back of the studio shot where you see the audience and the crew too. You might have ruined the ending of this film for me, Connor.
I will use...
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, Christian. No. I will use an analogy with Rammstein America for that music video, which is criticism of the Iraq War. And it's... I know. No. Don't worry, Connor. Don't worry. I'm not going to get into politics. Basically, they're playing on the moon, right? They're supposed to be the astronauts that are on the moon, like Neil Armstrong and such, Buzz Aldrin and company. And at the very end, they have the camera pull out, and they're seeing them all point, like do the makeup and everything, and they show all the cameras and all the thing. So it's playing into the fact that America is always showing a facade, and that it's just like the moon landing is fake. So it played a role in the actual plot of the video, and I think just being a meme and just saying like, oh, we do production and isn't it fun to film and then just show everything. I feel like there's really not any point to that other than that, and I feel like any film could do that, and if we could just, anybody who's supporting it could just say, isn't that great that they filmed the film, so it doesn't. That's why it didn't work for me.
Okay.
So weird tangent. I'm so sorry. I'll get back to the actual conversation. But talking about the moon landing being fake, it is not cinematically possible to have faked the moon landing. At the time in the 60s, we could not have had a light big enough and bright enough to make it look like the surface of the moon within a studio space.
Yeah.
Like, flat out impossible.
Even
so,
with
yeah,
Stanley
fun
Cooper
fact.
potentially directing.
Anyway, sorry, Christian.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you.
We invite tangents on this show.
Yeah.
Always. Oh gosh. I think I kind of agree. It didn't work with the like pulling out and showing the set or whatever. I wasn't a fan of that, but it was just kind of like yet another point where I was just immediately realized how much it wasn't for me. The whole thing just was not for me. And I was like, I immediately understood, like, oh, I see that some people like this like campfire tongue-in-cheek thing. And no, it reminded me of my dad has this opinion that when he sees a stage show or a musical or what have you, and immediately after the curtain call, if the actors start speaking to the audience as themselves, be it for like a charitable purpose or like thank you for coming or whatever, something like that, he dislikes that because it breaks the immersion of what you just witnessed, and it sort of brings everything back down to a baser level than before. The one thing I'll say in defense of Black Sabbath is I think the decision to do that kind of reflects a self-perception of like campiness and a very like non-pretentious way of approaching this type of storytelling, which I respect, even though I disagree with it and don't enjoy it, if that makes sense.
Okay. So yeah, mentioning the immersion idea, I think the ending almost reveals, tying into the campfire stories idea, Connor, that the point of the movie isn't necessarily to immerse you when you get to the end, at least. I think, like, telling scary stories around the campfire, you get to the end and the final message is, oh, and this is just a story. And this has all just kind of been in good fun. We've been having fun making this movie. You've hypothetically been having fun watching this movie. And hasn't this all been just a good laugh? And personally, I really enjoy that. I think my enjoyment of the ending has probably increased now that I make films and have like been on sets. I first saw this film when I was probably like 12 or 13. And at the time, I had very little interest in filmmaking. So I think the ending to me probably read as just, what? Why? But now that I think I'm more engaged in that kind of storytelling, I sort of understand and appreciate that choice more for what it is. I can definitely understand somebody saying, oh, it ruined my immersion because, Boris Karloff was the Vertalock and now he's riding a hobby horse and that's not scary. But I think ultimately that's kind of the point. And at least for me, that point works. Before we sort of segue into our closing segments here today, I do want to, and this is not just me dogpiling on Christian, but I do want to kind of mention, Christian, your Letterboxd review, sure. Where you described this as being an entry in a trashy subgenre. So I just want to ask the rest of the group here today, and this is not a conversation where
trashy.
Well, yeah. Would you describe this film as being trashy? Because I can definitely understand it being corny or not especially immersive, but trashy to me is a very specific kind of film. And I don't necessarily know if it fits Black Sabbath, but I'm interested to hear what the rest of you guys think. And Christian, maybe that's not what you meant, so I'm interested to hear from you as well.
Maybe I'll hop in at the end after you all have said your pieces. Yeah.
Sure.
Mid,
okay.
It's mid. Yeah, I think it's campy. I don't think it's trashy. I think out of all the Italian horror I've seen so far, maybe it's Zach's fault, I don't know. But I think this has been like, it feels the most like there was a lot of thought put in the production, and like it didn't feel like, it felt like a lot more of the campiness was intentional, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I can better understand why people enjoy that so much, and the tongue-in-cheek stuff, like Christian said. I think that's what makes it special, and I can understand that. But a lot of what makes it special to me does not does not come across to me. So
Okay.
See, I think if the other two films would have kept up the, and I don't know why I keep bringing this up. If the last two parts of the anthology would have been as blatantly and overtly horny as the first one, I think we might have gotten into trashy territory. Because in the first one, like, she's on the phone, and the person on the phone is like, I'm looking at your smooth legs and thinking about wringing your supple neck between my hands. It's like, okay, that's almost crossing the line. And it's like, if you have that, and then you start to get into, like, pointless nudity or, like, gratuitous violence, then you're like, yeah, this is, like, trash. This is just trashy, kind of pulpy fiction for the sake of, like, I'm going to walk in and go, ah, and walk out. But I think they pulled back from that precipice before it was too late.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mostly agree. I will be slightly pedantic and point out that the adjective trashy was applied to the subgenre of
Sure.
Italian horror, not the specific entry. And I do think it more accurately reflects something like Zombie 2, as Mitchell whispered a few seconds ago. And I mostly just did it to get Zach all riled up and to make a silly little talking point.
Damn!
you've been had.
even though it's I mean, I can only lawyer my way out of this to some extent. It's an inherently derisive way to describe something, but I also think that they're self-aware of their campy or trashiness or whatever label, whatever on that scale of, like, unrefined entertainment, wherever you want to describe it. I think they're fully aware of where they stand there. So if I had made that comment 2 years ago, I'm sure it would have been made in righteous anger. But this year, I just saw it as an honest appraisal, and probably harsh, but I don't think too far from where the directors and the creators would assess themselves, really.
Okay. Because I will say, I don't think all Italian horror can escape the trashy description. To clear things up a little bit, maybe for Connor and for our viewers, we mentioned Zombie 2. We've never reviewed Zombie 2. Zombie 2 is an Italian horror film that I showed Christian, Mitchell, and a friend of ours a couple years ago. It was the first Italian film I'd ever showed any of them, and I think it had a lasting negative impact on their respect for me, because that's a very trashy film. I think it's a successfully trashy film that kind of makes something out of that, but I will fully say it's trashy. The Beyond, which we talked about last season, that is a trashy Italian horror film. I really like it, and I think it works, but it's sloppy, it's trashy. It was shot without a shooting script, just as the director and the cinematographer and the special effects makeup artist went, hey, I wonder if we can do this thing. Can we, like, poke an eye out of somebody's head, like, from the back? Let's try it. And they did, and I think it's cool, but I can totally see how that could be described as trashy. But Black Sabbath, I think, to me, kind of like you mentioned, Mitchell, it's so detailed and feels so deliberate to me that I think trashy would not be how I would describe it, at least. I think about, like, in The Drop of Water, we talked about the lighting, but the production design, I think, in The Drop of Water is gorgeous. In the old woman's, like, bedroom where she dies, the camera never really lingers on it, but there's all these, like, baby dolls all over the room and just, like, newspaper clippings everywhere. And there's just so much detail packed into this one location that the film isn't even keen to necessarily show off and go, hey, here's where the budget went. But it's just there to kind of benefit the film. And I really appreciate that. To me, this has a lot in common tonally with something like a Hammer horror film or The Curse of Frankenstein or something like that. And I think it can't be pulpy, maybe, but trashy feels a little disingenuous to me, at least. So I'm glad we cleared that up. Connor, did you have something you wanted to mention?
Well, I was going to be really nitpicky, and I decided not to interrupt you, but the camera definitely did linger on the production design in, like, every single, like, short. Not I think in, like, a gratuitous way. It's not like we were getting inserts of all the cool stuff,
Yes.
But it was just like, to me, what production design should be, where it built the world and it looked very nice, but not in a way that ever detracted from what the shot was about.
Yes.
So it's like you have the spooky doll on the floor when she's like looking for the ring in the drop of water, and then it's just like another little spooky thing in what otherwise would have just been a shot of her like scrambling on the ground, where it just adds a little bit of atmosphere, into the shot that otherwise could become like generic.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with you there, Connor. They're smart in like showing their production design, but it's always in service to the point of the shot. We get these like nice wide shots of characters moving through the setting, and we see the setting in that shot because that's what the characters are moving through.
Or it's like in the Vertilac, like there's a weapon in every interior shot hanging on the walls. Like even in the guest bedroom, there's like 2 swords and a musket. And to me, that just like builds that like this is a violent little short where like everybody is armed and they're kind of paranoid in this moment. Where it's just small little details.
Yeah. I hadn't even noticed that about the Vertilac personally, but you are right about that now that I think back to it. And I guess, I mean, I really love Rose's apartment. I would love to live there, but I do think the telephone, not necessarily Rosie there. This is not just me being horny, but I will. Oh no!
Bonk, Zach.
But I will. I guess relent that the production design in the telephone is probably the least interesting of the 3 shorts. Thinking back, that kind of wraps up all of my questions. Do we have any other final thoughts on the film or anything we haven't mentioned before we transition kind of into the rundown?
I'll mention the costume design in the Vertilac stuck out especially. It felt immediately like a different time and a different, just entirely different place, and not to mention that it wasn't just Eastern Europe, it was Serbia, so I thought that was a cool touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Christian,
just
look like you're holding back.
Yeah, no, I'll just I'm glad Mitchell mentioned the Serbia thing. I'll just say my heritage, I am like mostly Serbian and then second mostly Italian. So I feel very justified in being hateful towards these demographics. so you can't cancel me because I'm one of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you Serbian, Connor?
No, I was going to make a very insensitive joke.
Okay. Any final thoughts, though, Connor, outside of that insensitive joke?
No, I mean, I think I said I said everything I had to say.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, yeah. As usual with these Italian horror films, I come out the other side being the person who really enjoyed the film. I like Black Sabbath a lot. For me, it's a 4 out of 5 film. I think it's great. I particularly like watching it around Halloween. I think it's a good film for kind of that spirit of the season. For me, Halloween and October, they're all about kind of telling these ghost stories with a little lighthearted edge, where nobody's really ever going to get frightened too bad. And so I think Black Sabbath sort of works for that, where there's eerie moments and there's little shots. There must be like 5 or 6 shots throughout this whole film where I went, oh, but at the end of the day, nobody's going to be traumatized. It's a good bit of fun horror, at least for me. Alrighty, so we are going to transition now into the rundown, our longest lasting additional segment on Cookie Pocket. Mitchell, would you care to introduce the rundown?
A minute, we destroy Christian.
Oh
with
no.
Stuff related to the film, not in a insatiably horny way, but in a
God.
cookie pockety
Damn.
way.
Connor, what have you done to this podcast?
My own
I knew it was a bad
creation.
idea inviting you on.
So yeah. That's
Okay, and Connor, I believe you should have the list for this, or a copy of the
Oh
list.
yeah,
at least.
I am ready to destroy Christian.
Okay. What order are we going to go in for these, Mitchell? Who's first, second, and third?
I'll go first, then Zach, then Connor.
We're doing it
Okay.
live.
Alrighty. So we've got a minute then in 3, 2, 1.
Italian Boris Karloff.
3 out of 5.
Making me turn around.
2 out of 5.
Spectres and Vampires.
3 out of 5.
Telephone Ring.
3 out of 5.
Very Nice Apartments.
4 out of 5.
Venetian Blinds.
4 out of 5.
It Being Nothing.
3 out of 5.
Disguising your voice with a handkerchief.
1 out of 5.
Christian Maric as horse that runs away.
2 out of 5.
Pillow Knife.
3 out of 5.
Being closer than the police.
3 out of 5.
Cursive technology.
4 out of 5.
I'm cold.
4 out of 5.
Talking shop again.
3 out of 5.
The big.
The big bright moon.
Ooh, 3 out of 5.
Doing what to his grandson?
3 out of 5.
Skeleton roommate.
3 out of 5.
Deathbed theft.
3 out of 5.
A neon sign right in your
time
window.
up.
Oh,
no!
I almost did it that time.
Okay.
Sign.
I almost did it.
We have a few leftovers, though. So when it comes time for our season finale, we'll work those into a grand season 4 rundown and see how many of those Christian can get through. Alrighty. Well, we are coming to the end of our episode, Cookie Pocket, episode 89. Thank you for being here today, Connor. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we leave today?
I mean, other than a wonderful short film called The Search for Alexander, which you should look out for in festivals near you. Also, Projection, a short film that I shot with Samantha Giordano, who was the director of Projection, but also the cinematographer for the other half of Zach's little project, which hopefully will be in festivals soon and, maybe up on YouTube in a year or two. Yeah, just thanks for having me on, fellas.
Absolutely.
Great to have you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good night from all of us here at Cookie Pocket, and have a spooky day, I
Dream
guess.
about us. We'll become friends.
Ciao.
And stay insatiably horny.
Goodbye.
Hello, Cookie Pocket listeners. Thanks for tuning in. We were so enjoying our guest host Connor Jake's company and discussing Black Sabbath that we forgot to preview our next podcast. The subject of our next will be Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So grab those fedoras, satchels, and whips and join us for what we hope is a fitting conclusion and not another unnecessary sequel. Hope to see you then.